What do you do when you find out your own parents have been stealing your identity for over a decade, and the final piece of their plan lands on the exact night of your birthday dinner? I found out the answer, and it started with a declined debit card at a grocery store checkout line. Before I go any further, hit like on this video right now, subscribe if you believe quiet people can still win, and share this with someone who has ever been the one everybody in their family leaned on and never thanked. This story is long, and it earns every minute. My name is Meredith Cole. I am 33 years old, and I work as a paralegal at a mid-sized firm downtown, which means I read contracts and financial documents for a living. That skill would matter more than I ever expected once this story started unfolding. I have a 6-year-old daughter named Piper, and I live in a small townhouse I bought myself 4 years ago, the first place that ever belonged only to me. My neighbor, a retired postal worker named Gene, keeps an eye on the place when I'm at work, and his old dog Winston naps on the porch like he owns it. Every other Sunday, I drive across town for dinner at my parents' house, because that is simply what our family does. My mother, Diane, plans everything down to the napkin folds. My father, Walter, mostly stays quiet and lets her run the room. My younger brother, Scott, has never held a job longer than 18 months, yet somehow always seems to have a newer truck than the year before. I used to think that was just good luck. I did not yet understand what luck actually costs. 3 weeks before my birthday, my mother called me twice in 1 week to talk about the dinner she wanted to throw. That itself should have been the first warning sign. My mother had not planned a birthday dinner for me since I turned 16. But grief and busyness make people generous with excuses, so I told myself she was simply softening with age, and I let the thought go. 2 days later, I stood at a pharmacy counter buying allergy medicine for Piper, and my card was declined. Then declined again. I paid with cash from the bottom of my bag, feeling my face go hot while the line behind me shifted with polite impatience. That night, once Piper was asleep, I finally did something I had put off for years out of simple busyness. I pulled my own credit report. What I found took my breath away. There was a credit card opened years earlier that I had never applied for, sitting at a balance of several $1,000s, seriously delinquent. That single account had dragged my score down enough to explain the decline at the counter. I stared at the billing address listed on the file, expecting some stranger's apartment in another state. Instead, I read the address of the house I grew up in, the same kitchen table where I had eaten pot roast every Sunday of my adult life. I want to explain something about my role in this family because it matters for everything that follows. I was always the responsible one. I filed my parents' taxes every spring since I was 22. I helped my father set up his retirement paperwork. When Scott's landlord threatened eviction, I was the one who wired money to fix it. My mother had a phrase she used every single time. "That's what family does, honey." I believed her for a very long time. The next morning, I called the bank listed on that fraudulent account, sat through the hold music, and asked the fraud department directly whether the account belonged to me. It did not. The representative read me the phone number attached to the account for verification purposes, and I recognized it instantly. It was my parents' landline, the same number I had memorized before I could even write in cursive. I hung up and sat very still at my kitchen table for a long time. My hands did not shake, which surprised me, because everything underneath my ribs felt like it was falling through the floor. Over the following days, I pulled my full credit history from all 3 bureaus, the complete official versions, not just an app summary. What I found was worse than one card. There were multiple accounts stretching back more than a decade, some closed, some still open and actively accumulating interest, all wearing my name like a costume that had never belonged to them. I lined the dates up on a legal pad the way I would organize evidence for a case file at work, because that is exactly what my brain understood this to be. The first account had been opened the same month I moved out of my parents' house at 22 years old, proud and excited, carrying boxes to my very first apartment. Someone had waited until I was gone and then opened a door behind me using my own name. If any part of this story feels familiar to you, I want you to comment below with a single word describing the person in your life who has ever tried to control you through quiet manipulation instead of open honesty. I read every comment, and this story only It's more important from here. Every single fraudulent account listed the exact same mailing address, my childhood home, meaning every statement, every late notice, every important letter had been intercepted for years before I ever had a chance to see it. That is when I understood this was not carelessness. It was a method, carefully maintained over more than a decade. I did the only thing that made sense to someone trained to build a case out of paper. I placed a hard credit freeze on my own file at all 3 bureaus, the kind that requires a personal code only I would hold. 2 days later, my mother called, her voice missing its usual warmth, asking why some bank verification for my father had suddenly failed. I asked her calmly which bank. She changed the subject entirely, and that tiny stumble told me everything I needed to know. My freeze, invisible and brand new, had already inconvenienced someone. I want to tell you about the day I finally understood the scale of it. It happened when I went looking through an old personal loan on my report, $12,000 taken out and quietly paid off years earlier. I checked the date against my own memory and felt the floor tilt beneath me. That loan had been opened the exact month I was in the hospital giving birth to Piper, hooked to monitors, recovering from a difficult delivery. While I was learning how to nurse my daughter for the first time, someone across town was signing documents in my name for $12,000. That discovery sent me to the county records office the following Monday. I spent nearly 7 hours combing through filings under fluorescent lighting until I found exactly what I feared. A power of attorney, general and durable, granting my parents full financial authority over my accounts, signed and notarized on the very day I had been lying in a hospital bed, unable to walk to the bathroom without assistance. I stared at my own signature on that document, confident and looping exactly the way I write my name, dated on a day I could prove through hospital records I was nowhere near that notary's office. A power of attorney is a skeleton key. Once I understood it existed, every fraudulent account, every mysterious address change, every strange bank call suddenly had a single spine holding it all together. I called my own credit union just to make sure the one thing that truly mattered, my townhouse, was still safe. My loan officer reassured me everything was clean, then mentioned almost as an afterthought that a routine property verification had come in from an unfamiliar lender the month before. Verification requests like that only happen for one reason. Somebody was actively checking what my home was worth, meaning something new was being built on top of everything already stolen, and it was not finished yet. For the first time since that declined card at the pharmacy, I understood I was no longer investigating something that had already happened. I was standing in the middle of something still in motion, and I had very little time left to stop it. Before we go further, I want you to imagine sitting across a family dinner table holding a truth large enough to break the whole house apart, and choosing, for a little while longer, to stay silent and gather proof instead. Tell me in the comments how long you think you could hold that silence, because what happens next in my story tests exactly that question. My neighbor Gene found me before I found him, which tells you everything about the kind of man he is. He knocked on my door one evening and told me, carefully, that a gray sedan had circled my street twice that week, slowing near my front door each time. He had written down the license plate out of old habit from decades of careful observation. I told him a version of the truth that night, sitting at my kitchen table with 2 cups of coffee going cold between us. He listened without interrupting once, and when I finished, he said something I have never forgotten. You don't need someone to feel sorry for you right now. You need a case number. He made one phone call to an old contact, and within an hour we learned the sedan belonged to a locksmith company operating out of a commercial account. Neither of us could yet explain why a locksmith would be circling my street, but the pieces were beginning to lean toward each other in a way that made my stomach turn cold. That same week, my mother called again about the birthday dinner, growing stranger with every conversation. She asked, almost too casually, whether I still kept my important documents in that small fireproof lockbox in my closet. She asked who watched my townhouse while I was at work. She even offered, generously, to keep Piper overnight so I could relax and enjoy a glass of wine after my party. Every question circled back to the same thing, Who has access to my apartment while I am somewhere else? I wrote each of those questions down on an index card and taped them in C to my closet door where Piper would never see them. 3 cards, then 4, then 5, forming a pattern I still could not fully name, but could absolutely feel closing in around me like weather before a storm. I emptied my real fireproof lockbox that weekend. Every genuine document, my daughter's birth certificate, my deed, my certified copies of that fraudulent power of attorney, went into a safety deposit box downtown, alongside a full duplicate of every piece of evidence I had gathered. The lockbox itself stayed exactly where it always sat on my closet shelf, refilled instead with old junk mail and blank paper, a decoy waiting for anyone who came looking for something real. A new deadbolt went on my front door that same weekend, along with a doorbell camera above the mat. My father visited a few days later, alone, which almost never happens, carrying a small box of screws for a shelf I had mentioned casually months earlier and clearly forgotten about. He stood on my doormat turning his cap over in his hands, his eyes sliding again and again toward my shining new deadbolt. For one brief moment, something moved behind his face, something that looked almost like a warning trying to find its way out. It never did. He said goodbye and drove off, and I understood that whatever information he carried home that night would reach my mother within the hour. That evening, my doorbell camera caught the gray sedan again, slower this time, pausing directly in front of my door before moving on. Whoever was planning this now knew about my new lock, and I understood the timeline had just shortened significantly. I filed an official identity theft report with federal investigators that week, listing every account, every date, every dollar amount I had painstakingly documented. When the form asked for my relationship to the person responsible, I sat staring at the drop-down menu for a long moment before selecting parent, twice, because both of them were involved. I scheduled an appointment with my local police department's financial crimes unit for the earliest slot available, and I brought an entire binder organized exactly the way I would prepare evidence for a courtroom. Detective Priya Anand read through my documentation in near silence for 20 minutes before asking her first question, and it was not about my parents at all. She asked who else held copies of everything I had found. I told her about the safety deposit box, and she nodded the way a professional nods when something has finally been done correctly. Then she slid one page back across the table toward me, a note about that property verification request from an unfamiliar lender, and tapped it twice. Everything else in this binder is history, she said. This page is different. This is money that has not moved yet. She explained that a home equity loan was currently in underwriting against my townhouse, using my name, tied directly to that fraudulent power of attorney, and scheduled to close and fund within the week, on a date my mother had already mentioned to me herself during one of her cheerful phone calls about paperwork appointments. If you have ever felt the strange, dizzying sensation of watching someone you love happily plan your own downfall without realizing you already know everything, share this video with someone who needs to hear that the truth always finds its way to daylight eventually. The detective explained the plan carefully. The bank's fraud unit had already flagged the loan internally, freezing it from the inside without triggering any outward alarm. From the outside, everything about the application would continue to look normal and on track, right up until someone walked in to sign the final paperwork and attempt to collect the funds. That gave my mother a narrow window to retrieve whatever documents she still needed from inside my home before that appointment, and she had already scheduled my birthday dinner squarely in the middle of that window. My father visited once more that week, and during dinner planning calls, my mother mentioned almost musically that Friday morning she and my father had, in her words, a little bank appointment. She had told me the deadline herself, wrapped entirely in cake talk and candle counting, 10 days in advance. That Tuesday night, my kitchen hosted an unusual meeting. Jean, Detective Anand, and myself around a table with a crayon drawing Piper had left behind. Jean's locksmith contact had heard through the grapevine about a rekey job booked for the evening of my birthday dinner at my exact address, ordered by a woman describing herself as a family property manager, claiming the resident was away at a family event. Detective Anand set down her coffee and said it plainly. Your dinner is not a party. It is an alibi built specifically for you to be somewhere else. The plan came together simply because it had already been built for us. I would attend my own birthday dinner, smile through every course, and let the evening play out exactly as scheduled. Detectives would be stationed near my home before the cake was even cut. My only instruction was to do nothing but be present and ordinary. Do not warn them. Do not stall them. Do not help them either. I drove Piper to a sleepover at my friend's house that Wednesday afternoon, packing her overnight bag with more care than the occasion strictly required. She asked if she still got cake even though it was my birthday, and she was having a sleepover instead, and I told her brownies outrank cake every single time. I hugged her longer than usual at the door, and she squirmed free exactly the way 6-year-olds are supposed to. Before getting dressed for dinner, I did one final pass through my binder, the way I check a document before filing it in court. That is when I found the page I had almost overlooked entirely, a credit inquiry from 5 weeks earlier, triggered under my daughter's name. Piper, 6 years old. A social security number I had personally watched get issued at a hospital desk, already entered into a credit application somewhere across town. Rage in my line of work converts into procedure or it becomes useless. I froze Piper's credit at all 3 bureaus immediately, something every parent listening right now should know is entirely possible, and I photographed every confirmation screen. I called Detective Anand, read her the date and creditor name, and heard her go quiet on the other end of the line, which told me more than words could have. Add it to the affidavit, she said. A minor changes everything. Judges read that page first. I zipped my dress, checked my reflection one final time, and drove the 15 minutes to my parents' house with the windows down, the July air thick and warm around me. My mother opened the door before I even knocked, smelling like perfume and lemon frosting, hugging me with both arms and calling me her birthday girl. The house had been staged beautifully, the good tablecloth ironed to a shine, candles waiting on the sideboard, a cake boxed on the counter like a small hostage. My father stood near the grill window peeling the label off his beer bottle, greeting me to a spot slightly left of my eyes. My brother Scott arrived last, freshly showered, sneakers instead of boots, and ruffled my hair like I was still 9 years old. Dinner unfolded exactly the way my mother always conducts things, on schedule, on script. She stood eventually, tapped her glass, and gave a toast about family being the only thing that truly lasts, about how proud she was of her responsible, hardworking daughter. Everyone raised their glasses. I raised mine too, looked her directly in the eye, and drank every last drop, because only 2 people at that table understood what her words actually meant, and one of us kept checking the kitchen clock. Between the main course and the cake, my phone buzzed once against my leg. I excused myself to the bathroom and read the message waiting for me. A clear scan of the notarized power of attorney, the second witness line finally legible after years of a blurred photocopy. My brother Scott's signature, dated the exact same day I was lying in a hospital bed unable to stand. A second photo showed a loan payoff from that same week, an $11,000 truck loan, settled in full, paid from my parents' account 9 days after that notary appointment. My brother had been bragging about that truck at every single family dinner since. Best thing I ever did, getting that loan gone, he always said, and I had believed him every single time. I flushed for the sake of appearances, washed my hands, and walked back to the table smiling, because that is the muscle 12 years of quiet service teaches you to build. The candles were finally being lit for the cake when my mother leaned toward my father and dropped her voice to a register she clearly believed was private. Since everyone's here, have your son change the locks at her apartment. 10 seconds, start to finish. My father's jaw tightened once. He gave the smallest nod I have ever watched a grown man produce and touched Scott's shoulder as he reached past him for the coffee. Scott stood, mentioned something about a work call, and was already thumbing his key ring out of his pocket as he walked toward the door. I sat through the longest 60 minutes of my life, eating cake, complimenting the frosting, agreeing that Friday would be a fresh start for everyone. And then headlights swung back up the driveway far too fast. The front door opened hard enough to knock the wreath askew, and my brother walked into that dining room the color of hospital sheets. He bent toward our mother, tried to whisper, but the silence in that room had already turned his whisper into an announcement everyone could hear. There were police at my building. They stopped the locksmith. They had a warrant. They knew about Friday. Nobody exploded in that first second. My aunt's hand froze halfway. Eye to her mouth. My father went pale and pressed both hands flat against the tablecloth like he was bracing something that was not actually moving. And my mother, smiled for one more second, past its natural expiration, her eyes doing rapid arithmetic around the table before landing, finally, on me. She stood so fast her chair scraped hard against the floor. "What did you do?" Rising through every octave as the hostess mask burned away entirely. "Everything I have done for this family. Everything you have came from this family." I stayed seated, hands folded calmly in my lap, and answered in the same level voice I use for the hardest conversations at work. "You're right, Mom. Even the debt. I filed a report about 2 people who forged my signature while I was in a hospital bed having your granddaughter. I placed one single page on the tablecloth and slid it toward the center of the table where everyone could see it clearly. A credit inquiry, 5 weeks old, run on a 6-year-old child." My aunt read it first and set it down like it had burned her fingers. "She's 7, my aunt whispered, staring at my mother. "She's 6, actually," I corrected quietly, but the point landed exactly the same. My father, gray and silent for most of the evening, finally said the only honest sentence I believe I have ever heard him speak. "She's telling the truth, all of it." My mother made one final stand from ground that had already collapsed beneath her. "I am your mother. This is my house. Family doesn't need permission." I stood, collected my purse from the back of my chair, and answered simply, "It does now. It's called a warrant." I drove home 15 minutes later with the windows down. My untouched half of the birthday cake belted safely into the passenger seat. My street was quiet again by the time I arrived. One unmarked car still parked patiently at the far end of the block. Gene stood at his front window with a mug in his hand, giving me a small, formal nod as I passed beneath the streetlight, his old dog thumping his tail once against the glass. My new deadbolt turned smooth and easy in the lock, the first door in my entire life that had only ever belonged to me. In the weeks that followed, charges were filed for identity fraud, forgery, and theft. My brother cooperated fully once he understood exactly what evidence already existed, and the fraudulent loan against my home never funded a single dollar. My credit was slowly restored, account by account, each deletion another small brick removed from a wall that had stood over me for 12 invisible years. Today, my daughter rides her bike in loops around our small parking lot, while Gene calls out lap times he is clearly inventing on the spot, and I open every single piece of mail that arrives at my address, because it only ever comes to me now. That simple fact, something most people never think twice about, is the entire prize I was fighting for the whole time. I used to believe love meant handing someone your keys and hoping for the best. I understand something different now. Real love never once needs to practice forging your signature. It never needs a decoy lockbox or a birthday dinner scheduled as a distraction. It shows up honestly, or it does not show up at all. If this story reminded you to check your own credit report tonight, or to freeze your child's credit before anyone else ever gets the chance to use it, take that as your sign, and do it today. If someone in your life needs to hear this story, share it with them right now. And tell me in the comments below what you would have done differently, because I read every single one, and your story matters exactly as much as mine did.